Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever this meeting may find you. My name is Jessica Wyndham. I'm Director of the AAAS Scientific Responsibility, Human Rights and Law Program. I'm beaming into you from the West Coast of the United States. This Science, Technology and Human Rights Conference was organized by the AAAS Science and Human Rights Coalition, a network of scientific societies that recognize a role and I might suggest also a responsibility of science and scientists towards human rights. The conference comes at a time of evident and pressing need for greater collaboration between the scientific community and human rights organizations, and a clear understanding about how to undertake such collaborations respectfully, responsibly, and effectively. The COVID-19 pandemic has laid bare persistent, pernicious, and pervasive social inequalities, both within countries and across countries. The health inequities that leave some communities more vulnerable than others, the resource inequalities that leave some countries devoid of vaccines while others are moving on to boosters, the education deserts that make some more vulnerable to misinformation than others. How have we responded? What have we learned? And what is going to change? Please let us not lose this opportunity to reimagine and then create a more equitable world. It's the right thing to do, and it's in everyone's interest to do it. The same can be said for the tech revolution that long preceded the pandemic, but has been shown to so starkly to present opportunities to tackle scientific challenges at the scale of a global pandemic, while also posing serious threats to society, from the use of technology as a tool to spread misinformation and disinformation, to technology-facilitated mass surveillance. This isn't a novel situation in which science and society find themselves. The need to define our values as a scientific community when we pursue new scientific discoveries and develop new technologies has been a process evolving through the ages. The same need for society to define its values when adopting these technologies exists now as it did decades ago. What we cannot ignore, however, is the scope, the scale, the seriousness of the implications that new technologies present, and therefore the urgency to respond thoughtfully and collectively. And a final existential concern from which there is a huge sense of urgency within the scientific community, a growing urgency within society, and an evident need for collaboration is that of climate change. Science and society need to come together, as they have already started to do, to identify and measure the impacts of climate change and forecast future impacts, to devise strategies to address and mitigate climate change, and to respond to the humanitarian crises caused by climate change. The urgency of the issues I've mentioned, together with others, is reflected in the agenda of this conference, an agenda formed based on the priorities of those within the community of individuals and organizations working at the intersection of science and human rights. So as we meet over these 2 days to learn and to strategize about how to move forward, I wanted to take this opportunity to reflect a little on where we've come from. This is going to be my last meeting as director of the program that serves as the secretariat of the coalition. After 14 years at AAAS, 10 of which I served as coordinator of the AAAS Science and Human Rights Coalition, I'll be returning to my first home of Australia. This meeting, therefore, offers me an opportunity to reflect on how far we've come, but also to recognize how far there still is to go, and why this coalition remains as vital today as it was when it launched 12 years ago. The coalition was created to serve principally as a bridge between scientists and human rights practitioners and their organizations, to build the capacity of those on both sides of that bridge so that they could more effectively adopt and adapt the knowledge and methods of the other, and more effectively work together towards shared goals. To share knowledge across the communities and including with policymakers, and most importantly, to affect change. So what change have I seen in the past 12 years? I'm going to address that question at 3 levels: the scientific enterprise, scientists, and society. Now, professional scientific societies are a major force within the scientific enterprise. In some instances, they serve as formal accreditation or licensing bodies. They establish the ethical standards of a discipline. They promote certain science and scientists through their publications and public fora. And they establish and reflect the values of a discipline, defining the culture for scientists and for students alike. Before the coalition was formed, there were several scientific societies that were highly active in promoting and protecting the rights of scientists. Now, many of those committees have expanded their remit to embrace activities reflecting the multiple connections between science and human rights, and I'll get to that in a moment. And yes, they still pursue individual casework. They also engage the members of their society to explore how to apply their discipline to human rights challenges. And they contribute to new ethical standards that recognize that science, in its conduct and in its applications, can violate human rights. We see in the leadership of these societies less fear about engaging in human rights, less concern that members won't like it or that it will appear too political. Indeed, we see more action, individually and collectively, to address human rights issues head-on, be that through joint statements to Congress, urging ratification of a human rights treaty, or submission of amicus briefs pointing out the human rights implications of government policies. We see human rights tracks at annual meetings, pages on society websites dedicated to human rights, and internal mechanisms created to assess the human rights track records of scientific societies and recommend paths forward. At the individual scientist level, we see courses being taught to scientists addressing human rights issues, as we see more human rights practitioners being taught about how scientific methods can serve as a useful tool in their toolbox. We see community-based research being pursued more frequently and more thoughtfully. There are greater career opportunities for scientists within human rights organizations, as well as volunteer opportunities. Together, these developments have given greater legitimacy to the work of scientists in applying their skills and designing their teaching in a way that brings science and human rights together. At the societal level, we see greater collaborations among scientists and human rights organizations, civil society organizations, and communities. We see this not only in the United States, but also across the world. I don't mean to suggest that all of these changes are as a result of the coalition's efforts, although several are, or that through these changes the world's problems have been resolved. Of course not, but the coalition's work has most certainly contributed to these changes, and these changes are pieces of the puzzle required to solve societal challenges. One area in which the coalition has indeed had a major role to play has been in defining the contours of the puzzle. It may appear esoteric to some, but it's not. The coalition has been at the forefront of creating a conceptual framework for addressing the connections between science and human rights and what that translates into in practice. In the early days of the coalition, drawing from the work of Richard Pierre Claude in his important book, Science in the Service of Human Rights, we navigated toward an understanding that there are 5 principal connections between science and human rights. I'll present them in the order in which we usually discuss them, but without any suggestion that there is intended to be some sort of hierarchy amongst these connections. So first, scientists have human rights. Of course, everyone has human rights, but there are some rights of particular relevance to scientists. The right to freedom of expression, to freedom of movement, to freedom of information, the right to scientific freedom. From restrictions on immigration to threats made against scientists speaking up for mask mandates to the firing, imprisonment, or worse of scientists who express politically unpopular views, it's not at all infrequent to see the rights of scientists violated. Second, science can be applied to human rights questions. Examples in this arena abound and continue to grow. Forensic anthropology, geology, mathematics and statistics, petroleum engineering, psychology, chemistry, linguistics, acoustics. You give me a discipline and in time and I can identify you a human rights application for it. Third, however, is the recognition that science in its conduct or the application of scientific knowledge can violate human rights. Early in my days at AAAS, the Presidential Commission for the Study of Bioethical Issues turned its attention to a study conducted in Guatemala that had involved deliberately infecting prisoners, amongst others, with sexually transmitted diseases. In their report, Ethically Impossible, the Commission referenced multiple human rights violations represented in the work that had been done. That study had been conducted decades ago, but we don't need to go too far back to see other examples of scientific developments or technological developments that have had negative human rights impacts. Fourth, scientists can serve as a constituency for human rights in bringing the weight of the community to a human rights concern, as we have seen done in the examples I mentioned earlier, including immigration restrictions, but also the rights of LGBTQ people, global vaccine equity, and innumerable other areas. Finally, international law and some domestic constitutions recognize a right to enjoy the benefits of scientific progress. Even in countries that don't recognize such a right, there are elements of the right as defined that are applicable in all contexts. And here I get to the second normative evolution and contribution of our work over the past 10 plus years. And this is a major contribution of the coalition, defining what the human right to science means from the perspectives of scientists, engineers, and health professionals, and influencing the United Nations process of formally defining the right. There's a lot I could say here, but I'll focus on just 3 elements of the right. The right requires that government policies be informed by the best available science. It's a simple notion, powerful in its importance, difficult in its implementation in practice. It requires of government to establish processes whereby such science can be received and assessed, as it requires of scientists that they act responsibly and with integrity in their engagement with policymakers. It also requires of scientists a particular skill set to translate and communicate their knowledge in a way that is both accurate and helpful to the policy process. The right is also addressed not just to ensuring everyone has access to the products of science, but also to the knowledge generated by science. Here I'm talking about knowledge that you or I could understand, that we could use as the basis for personal decisions, informing our engagement with policy and political processes, not just what members of the relevant discipline will understand when reading relevant journals. One important implication of this right is that governments have a positive obligation to correct misinformation or disinformation that may be harmful to people, and most certainly not to be the source of such misinformation itself. The other implication, and here I turn to another element of the right, is one that recognizes that education and training in science at all levels, in informal and formal settings, is critical to the enjoyment of the right to science overall. Because of that, we need to be conscious of who is and who is not receiving a quality basic education in science and address the barriers to that. We also need to identify and address the barriers to everyone having the opportunity of becoming a scientist and succeeding as a scientist. There is certainly greater focus given to that now in the multiple actions addressing diversity, equity, and inclusion in STEM that we see emerging, and the coalition is playing its part in that. These conceptual frameworks can provide the foundations upon which future change can occur. So what more needs to be done? As you all know, there are still serious systemic and other barriers to greater, more expansive change and measurable impact. Within the scientific community, we need to see all disciplines recognizing their role and responsibility in this endeavor. There are standout examples in the social sciences, in statistics, in the behavioral sciences and engineering. But if the multidisciplinary and interdisciplinary challenges faced by society are going to be tackled robustly, they need a truly multidisciplinary approach. We need for young scientists coming up through the ranks with a personal passion for human rights to be able to marry that passion with their professional aspirations as a scientist. That means rethinking the values reflected in promotion and tenure, in grant review, in mentoring relationships. This is no small task, it's mammoth, but some work has started and needs to be supported and built upon so that the systems that train and guide our young scientists allow them the full breadth of opportunities to contribute to society. We need to be welcoming of more voices. We need to learn to listen to those with needs that science can help address and work together to find solutions in ways that are respectful and responsive to the context in which those individuals and communities reside. And finally, as a community of scientists, we need to recognize that the responsibilities of scientists are not only internal, to peers, to research subjects, to publishers, they're also external to society. And so we come back to where I began, collaborations. Society's challenges don't have one solution. Society's challenges require the inputs, the expertise, and the insights of many. My hope is that through this conference, some of you will have your eyes opened to the human rights dimension of a challenge you've previously considered to be a scientific one. That some of you will have your imagination ignited by the possibilities that scientific approaches can provide to addressing a social challenge with which you're grappling. And I hope we can all learn how to more effectively work together. The conference platform being used for this meeting offers you opportunities to learn, to connect, to ask questions, and to find collaborators. If you've not yet watched the short video that will talk you through how to most optimally use the platform, I strongly suggest that you do. You'll find the video on the conference homepage. So before I close my remarks, I want to say a few thank yous. Principally, first and foremost, to Teresa Harris, the coalition coordinator, who's the mastermind behind all that you will learn, enjoy, and experience over the next 2 days. To Nate Weisenberg for all the many, many contributions he's made to the event. To Jordan Schwartzbach, Joel Erickson, and to Jonathan Drake. I want to thank the program committee, a truly stellar cast, which developed the theme for this year, the call for proposals, and selected the best sessions from among those proposals. So thank you to Ali Arab, Aramati Kasper, Gisek Dang, Michelle de Graaf, Rebecca Everly, Yusuf Farhat, Julie Maldonado, Amber Nashoba, Claire Robinson, Natalia Cianco, and Gabriel Velez. And thank you to all the session organizers, presenters, and the AVEX team, especially Joshua Illy and Keegan Blankenship, who will make your virtual experience a seamless one, at least to the extent that it is within their powers. And finally, I want to thank all of you for joining us, and to all my colleagues in the coalition for the work you do to bring science and human rights together. And now, to help you practice using this platform, I want to invite questions. I want to invite discussion. There is a thread here that I can see, so please post your questions. Please post your comments. I would love to hear from you. Thank you.